Honky Tonk Women by the Rolling Stones, a perfect way to welcome Bill Wyman. Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
It's been a big year this year in a way, in two big ways. First of all, your marriage to Suzanne, and secondly, your decision to leave the Rolling Stones. Starting with the happy event of marrying Suzanne, you've known each other actually not just for a little while, but for quite a long while, right?
Yeah, we've been friends almost 14 years, actually. We met in 1980 when I was in Paris with the Stones, recording, and she was modelling. And we just met each other and sort of hit it off and became friends and stayed friends over the years, actually.
Well, congratulations on that. What about the decision to leave the Rolling Stones? I mean, was that your decision or theirs?
It was mine. I made it actually 2 years ago, nearly 2.5 years ago. But they wouldn't believe me for a year.
Really?
Yeah, I made that in January 2 years ago, at our first meetings after the tours, really. I just thought it was time. I thought it was a great time to end because we'd never been bigger. We'd never had greater tours. And it was just like, for me, a grand finale. The 3 tours of America, Europe and Japan were so enormous. They were bigger than anything that had ever been done before by anybody or since, I believe. It just seemed a fantastic time to stop. It had been 29 years. And I was a bit older than the rest of them, and I just thought it was a really nice time to stop. I always wanted to stop at the top, not on the way down. I didn't want to be a shadow or something, you know.
Yeah.
Like cliffs.
Either with a small S or a big S. But what was it you were giving it up for? You'd had enough of touring, or?
Well, it'd never been my total obsession in life, as it is with some members of the band, and good luck to them for that. I've always had other interests. I've always been involved in other things, other hobbies, writing music for movies and all kinds of things like that, getting involved in many other different sports, hobbies and aspects of life, and I wanted to increase more on them, because when I joined this band, when I was quite young, in 1962, no one ever believed it'd go more than 2 years, because it never did. Rock bands or pop bands never went longer than 2-3 years, and it seemed a good way of earning some money at the time and having some fun and getting around a bit, and then back to normal life. And it never got back to normal life, you know. It was, and you never had a chance to do all the things you were interested in doing. And I thought it was time to just sit back and enjoy the fruits of my labours, and also enjoy some of my hobbies a bit more. And family, of course.
Yeah. I mean, what was the highlight for you of the whole Rolling Stone era? I mean, you said the last tours were a superb climax.
Yeah.
But earlier than that, was there one particular moment?
It was probably the first couple of trips to America, Australia, just travelling abroad. First times all around Europe, Scandinavia. Australia was great in 1965, the first time we went there. And America, we went twice in 66. First one was a disaster, because nobody had ever heard of us and we didn't have any hit records or anything. And the second one, it happened for us. Yeah.
Because your background, you said, was...
And they were really really exciting times then.
Yeah.
You know, everything was so new, naive. You didn't carry a retinue of 300 people like we do now. And it was just so fresh, you know. There'd be 6 of you or 7 of you, and that's it. Us and the roadie, Ian Stewart, who was almost a band member, and Andrew Oldham, our co-manager, and that was it. And like a tour manager, an American tour manager that the agency sort of set up, and it was so easy. Jump in 2 cars and off you went, you know.
Yeah. It was innocence in those days.
It was naivety as well, but it was exciting for that reason. You weren't cocooned like you are these days.
Is that just because the tours have got bigger and bigger and bigger, and
it's
the
just that you
crowds get out of control?
you can't mix. You can't go shopping in the town when you go on tour. You can't look around. You can't be a tourist. Well, you can, but it's very difficult. You have to go with security and a blackened car and try to go to places other people don't go to, and so you don't really enjoy where you're going.
So you go to all the worst restaurants, the ones that are empty, I mean.
Yes, or the ones they open specially for you, which are empty anyway by the time you get there. You miss a lot, and I don't know, I got fed up with that.
Your background you've said that it was very before the years of plenty with the Rolling Stones. You really grew up in considerable poverty, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. It's a large family of that time, six children. Yeah,
And
Southeast London.
And food was scarce.
Yeah, well, I was born just before the war, so I lived through the wartime and through rationing, which went right through after the war. I mean, the war ended in 1945. We were still on rations in 1953, by which time I was 17 then, you see, 16 or 17. So all my life I'd been on food rationing, and you didn't see fruit, you didn't see all that sort of thing. It was quite extraordinary. Get your first banana, you ate the skin as well, because you didn't know how to eat it.
And even the first pencils that were painted on the outside were
luxurious
because they used to be just plain wood, didn't they? I mean, it was just. Well, let's pause for a bit of music. What would you like to hear?
I'd like to hear Dr. John, actually, doing Making Whoopee, the Ray Charles song.
Your wish is our command.
Thank you.
That was a request by Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones. How old were you when you realised that you wanted to be a musician, or was it quite late?
Well, I took some piano lessons when I was 4, not because I wanted to, but my parents thought it was a good idea at the time. I suppose it was. Got me out of the house as well. And I used to go on one of those trams from Sydenham, where we were living at that time, in southeast London, up to Honor Oak, and in one of those windy trams, which was quite an exciting thing, just before they were taken away. And then I did some piano lessons when I started to live with my grandmother when I was about 10 or 11. Carried on piano lessons, passed a few of those classical exams, and I hated doing that music. I always wanted to play. I used to pep up the music, and I used to get smacked, you know.
But you were playing not a bass guitar at this point. You were.
Oh no! There was no such thing as bass guitars in those days. And then I went into the military, national service, in 1955, and I was posted out to Germany, North Germany, with the RAF, and it was there that I heard American Forces Network, AFN radio, and they were playing the very beginnings of rock and roll in 1955. Little Richard, Fats Domino, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, so on.
The thought of you in the forces.
In a little RAF uniform. Saluting.
It is a fantastic thought. And the hairstyle was somewhat shorter too, presumably.
It was more a Tony Curtis, Gene Vincent sort of look, you know.
Yeah.
Swept at the back with a bit of a DA at the back.
Bit of a DA at the back.
Yeah, tried to keep hold of that, even though...
Did they let you keep it in the RAF?
Yeah, because they weren't too bad. They shaved the sides a bit, but they left the back. If you could tuck it under your hat, you were all right. And just the quiff hanging down the front, you know. Yeah. Bit of a rebel.
And what were the sort of things after national service that you did before 1962? You worked as a bookmaker or something?
Oh, yeah, when I left school. My dad made me leave school, actually.
Well, that must have been a terrible shock, because you were just about to take your O-levels, weren't you?
Yeah, I was
GCE?
Yeah.
No, exactly, but they can turn to the English people next to them and say, what are those two people talking about?
Yeah.
But
15,
these are the exams,
isn't it?
the vital exams at 16 to get your qualifications for life.
Yeah. It's like graduation, isn't it, in America, I suppose. Yeah, it was 3 months before. It was in the Easter. He just insisted. They always resented, my parents always resented me going to a posh school.
Did they?
Because I was from a very working class family, a very working class area and street. And they really resented that. They thought I was too good, thinking I was too good for my boots. When you tried to talk properly, you was admonished. So it was very difficult.
Did they think you were getting too posh? Or?
Yeah, so I used to live with my grandmother, to make it easy. It was very difficult at that time. And then, out of a kind of revenge, he pulled me out of school just before my exams and stuck me in probably the worst job I could possibly have, working for a bookmaker, a racing gambling establishment, horse racing, which I hated to do, and that was it. I was there for about 18 months or 2 years, and then I went into the RAF and got away from it, but it was impossible to get a job when I came out of the RAF then.
What did you do?
Well, I went everywhere for jobs, insurance companies and all kinds of things, and they said, what was your last job? And I said, I was in the RAF 2 years. What did you do before that? I worked for a bookmaker. Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah,
and they didn't want to know because it's a slur.
Yeah, exactly. people may not realise today that back then bookmaking was decidedly dicey, wasn't it?
Yes, it was very dodgy.
You didn't have casinos, etc., etc. And I mean, so this would be a bad thing to have to say in an interview.
Yeah, and people always thought of bookmakers as people that crept around streets taking slips of paper out of people's pockets and hiding and all that. So it was a very difficult time. So I got a few dodgy jobs, clerical jobs which weren't paying very much, and at that time I was really into music, but I had no way of doing it. And I eventually, at one of these places I worked, I eventually met this other guy, a guy called Steve Carroll, and he had a guitar, and I got a guitar. Well, I did get a guitar in Germany, an acoustic guitar, and mess about playing skiffle and things, because that was what all the English people were doing. I mean, all the great English rock musicians, from Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Mick Jagger, Keith Richard, all of them, the Who people, all the Kinks, they all played skiffle when they started off. It was an easy music to learn. And so you started there, and then you tried to improve. So we all had a smattering of guitar or whatever, and I just got together with this kid, Steve, who was a local friend, and we got another friend together, and we just formed a little group. Found a drummer eventually, found a singer, and we formed this little band in about 1960 in South London, and we called it the Cliftons, because one of the guys was called Cliff and one was called Tony. Tony
logical.
being the drummer that joined the Rolling Stones just before I did and before Charlie did, and introduced me to the Stones. Tony, my drummer from my band, the Cliftons. And we played around the South London area and Essex and that for about a year and a half or something, doing youth clubs and small dances.
But earning a living from that, or earning a living doing other things during the day?
No, you'd only earn about £6 between you, or £5 between you or something. I was working all the time, yeah. Because by that time I was married, and in 1962 my son was born. So
Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen. So I had to keep a regular job going as well. So there was a great loss of sleep in those days.
Yeah, with the baby and the music.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the work.
And the work.
Yeah.
And the work during the day. And when exactly did the moment of meeting the Rolling Stones as such come about? 62, was it?
Yeah, December 62. I think it was the 6th or the 8th or something. Tony had been playing about 2 or 3 odd gigs with them, because we weren't doing, we were only playing once or twice a week. And he'd gone up there and he was playing a few gigs with Brian Jones. And by that time, Mick and Keith had joined Brian and Ian Stewart. Ian Stewart and Brian Jones started the band, really.
Yeah, that's forgotten a lot.
And
now,
Mick and Keith joined them, and then that's when Tony came in as a sort of temporary drummer. And they didn't have a bass player, because the sort of bass player they had left to continue studies is Dick Taylor, the one who started the Pretty Things, actually. He was with them very briefly. And then they had no bass player, and he said, they haven't got a bass player, this band, this blues band. Why don't you come up and have a rehearsal? And I thought, well... He played me some blues music, which I'd never really heard. I thought, it's a bit slow and dirgy, isn't it? And it's all 12-bar blues, it shouldn't be too difficult. And so I went up there with all my massive giant amplifiers.
Oh, yes.
And walked in the back of the pub in Chelsea, in World's End, and they said, this is Bill, and no one took any notice of me. Mick vaguely said hello. Brian and Keith sort of ignored me. They were sitting at the bar having a drink, and me and Tony dragged all these amplifiers in, and their eyes opened wide, and they all sort of got round, and suddenly it was like all happening.
So yes,
it was all chatty.
The amplifiers played a big role.
Well, they didn't have any, really.
So this was a big plus.
Yeah.
They got a bass guitarist and some amplifiers.
Yeah, and a whole room full of equipment, really. I had echo chambers, I had everything. Yeah.
How much was it the music, and how much was it the image, the rebellious image, that really made you take off, do you think?
I think it was as much one as the other. We were a totally different band to anybody you'd ever seen before. We were the only band in those days that didn't wear a uniform. We were the first band that went on television or went on stage in theatres or anything without a uniform, casually. And that was unthinkable. And we used to have enormous rows with promoters and agents, and people used to go nuts. You're not ready, you're going to be late, you haven't got your makeup on, and all this stupidity. And the other thing was, we were playing quite earthy, sort of hypnotic music that nobody ever really played or listened to before except in some of the clubs in London.
And so it was a combination of the two things. I think they were both important.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, you were very rebellious, and there was the sort of bad behaviour as people saw it with marijuana and urinating.
I know, but that came because of the attitude of people against us. Really, that you rebelled against them, then, didn't you? I mean, if people just accepted you for what you were, it probably wouldn't have happened. We probably would not have been as big as we are. But people just objected and were rude to us, and we were rude back. And then we got bad names because they only wrote about us. They didn't write about the people that were rude to us. They didn't write about why we urinated in the garage. They just wrote that we did. The reason we urinated in the garage was because they wouldn't let us use the toilets because they were afraid of us. When they saw
really?
us.
I didn't realise that.
Because I was the one that started.
Yeah. Well, that was a very, very good explanation. Let's have another bit of music. What would you like to hear now?
I'd like to hear a very new song, a new recording from someone that was around in 63 in London, in those clubs. And sometimes we supported him as on the bill, and that was Georgie Fame.
Oh, yeah.
A wonderful singer and great jazzy, bluesy performer. I love him, and it's a really great version of Ray Charles' song, Georgia on My Mind. In fact, it's about the best one I've ever heard, apart from Ray Charles, and I'd like to hear that. Right.
Well, that's a big compliment. Ray Charles is having a big influence on this conversation.
He is, isn't he?
Second Ray Charles number, and here it is.
On my mind.
That was Georgie Fame, Georgia on My Mind, and that request was for our guest, Bill Wyman. Now, you survived the 60s, and Mick Jagger and co. survived the 60s and so on. Some people didn't. Overall, do you think the influence of the 60s has been a good one, or some moralists say, a bad one?
I thought it was a marvellous time, although you didn't know any different, so you didn't realise what was happening so much in the world around you, but everything was changing, wasn't it? Fashion, photography, art, music, just on all levels. You had the Mary Quants, the David Baileys, the Gene Shrimptons, and all those names, and all the movie people, the Terry Stamp and all those, and Donovan the writer, the singer, and Donovan the photographer as well. There were just people coming out of the woodwork, and they were all young people with new ideas, and it just all blossomed. And then the 70s, it just all sort of just faded away again, didn't it? And sort of got very dull again. And it was a magical time, but you didn't realise you were going through a sort of huge change. Because we always, when we're young, we all look for changing the world, don't we? But we never expect that it's going to happen. But we did. I think the Stones did have some influence in the changes in the world at that time. I mean, 10 years later, you were seeing Russian footballers playing matches with long hair, which was unthinkable. So, I mean, if you look at the England '66 football team who won the World Cup, they are so shorn of hair. You've never noticed. Yeah. And that was '66. That was 4 years after we started, when we had long hair. So people were still conforming in a way, but it did change later in the '60s.
Do you think it's?
But we did lose people like Brian Jones, of course, in our band.
You're Brian Jones, exactly. And I mean, do you think it's come full circle now, or do you think people have met you halfway? Or do you think we're back into another conformist period? Well, no, you don't.
I just think we live in the legend now. I just think it's just going along. I don't find it so exciting anymore. And as I say, that was one of my reasons for being done with it, really, and getting on with something else. I didn't see anywhere else to go.
So it's lost its magic for you, and so you made the decision. It hasn't lost its magic, though, for Mick Jagger or Keith, presumably.
I suppose it depends what you're in it for, what you want to achieve. I don't know. I would have thought that they would have achieved everything they needed to in the music business, but that's their choice. I mean, Charlie's got his jazz band now. He's having a wonderful time over the last 4 or 5 years. He's put this jazz band together in his spare time. He plays gigs. He goes and plays Carnegie Hall for a week in New York. He goes to Japan. He goes to South America. He has fantastic time. I'm sure he has a great time with that band because it's something he always wanted to do, you see, and he never got round to doing before.
And you said now you'll have more time to pursue your interests, your hobbies and so on. There's cricket, there's the restaurant, Sticky Fingers. That's business, but that's a sort of hobby too, isn't it?
Yeah, that has been a very successful venture, and I'm very happy with that. We're just celebrating our 4th birthday, actually, next week. That's gone on very, very well. A very successful restaurant. And it gives me a chance of showing off a bit of my collection of memorabilia
Yes.
on the walls.
You are a great collector, aren't you? And a lot of it is there. But
I have been, yeah. I thought every rock and roll artist kept things, but nobody did. When I speak to people from the Beatles, and nobody ever had anything or kept anything. Seemed to be the only one that did.
And one of your next plans, according to the press clippings, is you'd like to start a family with Suzanne.
Yeah, we're already having a go at it.
Very good. Well, good luck with that as well. Bill Wyman, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.